Welcome to 5G Hub. Go ahead and make your way over to the seats here, please. We'd love to get started. Looking at the clock, this will actually be one of the first times that we actually start on time. So there you go. That's for you, Murthy. Thanks for being here. Go ahead and make your way over. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Salar Taghazadeh, responsible for this space. So good to have all of you here with us. If you were at our previous session last month, you know that we've started this new thing where we do some trivia questions with some fun opportunities to win questions or win prizes. So why don't we kick that off for this month's session on Web3. If you want to win prizes, go ahead and make your way over. I promise these seats are really comfortable. It's also a way better viewing experience than if you're in the park. But I get it. There's booze over there. I can't compete with that. So why don't we kick this off? Yes, right there, that one right in the front. Ooh, I get the music too. So the format, if you can still hear me, the format will be that we'll read the question together, we'll look at all the options, and then I'll look for hands, and then I'll pick on you, and you'll say A, B, C, or D. If you win, hopefully you do, you get a prize walked over by my colleague here, Shayla, somewhere. But why don't we kick this off? First question, let's see. Web3 can be defined as the internet of what ethos that has emerged from the distributed data layer built into the internet? Is it A, privatization, B, ownership, C, portability, or D, autonomous? That's the first hand I saw go up. B, ownership, and B is correct. Thank you. Woohoo! We could cheer. Yeah! Web3 can be defined as the internet of ownership ethos that has emerged from the distributed data layer into the internet. Let's move on to next question. We've got, what technologies make up Web3? Is it A, blockchain, B, tokens, C, smart contracts, or D, all of the above? First hand I saw go up. D, is it D? Yes, it is. D, all of the above. Thank you. This is a smart crowd. I do got to look up there, but the seats are here, so I'm going to maybe look here first. Next question. We've got, what percentage of Americans buy, sell, or trade digitally? Is it A, 36%, B, 52%, C, 65%, or D, 71%? First hand I saw go up. A, define digitally. That's the question. That's all I got. A is not the right answer. Anyone want to go for a second try? B is the right answer. Yes, 52% of Americans buy, sell, or trade digitally. Maybe this one could be disputed. I don't know. We don't know what digitally means. Okay, let's see. Next question. How many unique active Bitcoin and Ethereum addresses are there? Keyword active, maybe keyword unique. A, 80 billion, B, 97 billion, C, 80 million, 97 million, 1 billion, or 1.2 billion. First time I saw go up. B, 97 million is not the right answer. C, 1 billion is also not the right answer. D, 1.2 billion is the right answer. Wow, that's a lot. All right, here we go. Next question. DAO stands for, I think a lot of you are going to get this right. Wow, all the hands are going up. DAO stands for Department of Asset Office, Department of Autonomous Operations, Designated Authorizing Organization, or D, Decentralized Autonomous Organization. I can't take your word. I trust you. I can't take your word. You gentlemen in the back. D is the right answer. Decentralized Autonomous Organization. I highly recommend you guys joining us here. This is where the fun is. I would love it if I could pick on you all too. Here we go. I think this is the last question. What are the core values in the Web3 culture shift? Ooh. Is it A, privatization, autonomy, portability, ownership, transparency, portability, C, profitability, transparency, collaboration, or D, ownership, place, integrity? Gosh, who was it? Oh, I think it was you. Is it B? Yes, it is. Ownership, transparency, portability. Thank you all so much for playing our trivia tonight. Thanks for being here. Hopefully that was fun and informative. Before I get off the stage, a couple of quick plugs. Major shout out to all of our demo partners for being here tonight with us, making this an awesome event. We've got T-Mobile Wholesale in the house, Venity, CoinMe, Nifmint, 3Num, Fresh Credit. If you haven't yet, stop by the Nifmint booth, get your minted NFT for tonight's special event for being here. And check out the other booths too. There's some real fun stuff happening. More than anything, learn, connect, be a part of this ecosystem. And lastly, from me, 5G Hub, we've been doing this now for 7 months. There's a few more sessions to get us through the rest of the year. We're here as a resource. We're obviously within T-Mobile's technology organization here, and we're here to work with partners, startups, large companies, small companies. If you've got a fun, innovative, interesting idea, we'd love to be a part of it with you, help you figure out some of the kinks and quirks, and help us both be successful. So check us out at techexperience.com. We'd love to take things further. And without further ado, I'll get off the stage so the real fun can happen. Thanks, everybody.
Wow, hello. Good afternoon, good evening. Gosh, it's always a tough act to follow. I don't have any swag bags to hand out, but I do get to welcome you to the 5G Hub Seeker Series on this beautiful, sunny summer evening here in Bellevue, Washington. A perfect day to explore the very exciting, promising, and still a bit mysterious technology of Web3. The internet has been consistently evolving. When it comes to how we experience the internet, the pace of change has been truly astounding over the past few decades. Starting with the internet of data in the 1990s, to the internet of people in the 2000s, to the internet of things in the 2010s, and now in this decade, we have the internet of place and the internet of ownership. That is a digitally native infrastructure powered by technologies such as blockchain, tokens, smart contracts, and more, that create the ability for people to carry their identity, money, and objects from place to place in the digital world, what we refer to as Web3. So why does Web3 matter? Well, with Web3 technology, we are witnessing a user-led cultural shift towards 3 important concepts. You heard about these on the quiz, or the trivia. First, ownership, offering new ownership models for user data, identity, money, and objects. Second, transparency, making it possible to easily verify origin and transactions. And third, portability, enabling users to freely move from place to place, taking their money, identity, objects with them. This shift in expectations is driving fundamental changes to the ways we transact and interact. And the economic activity is already significant, with adoption poised to increase materially as additional use cases emerge and user experiences become streamlined. In fact, over 52% of Americans now buy, sell, or trade digital items. And Nike alone earned over $185 million in revenue in just 1 year selling NFTs. Not to mention the global cryptocurrency market capitalization is currently over $1 trillion. So how do we drive Web3 adoption? Well, consumer adoption will be driven by its ability to build communities and offer real-world value through simple and intuitive user experiences. And organizational adoption of Web3 hinges on the ability to deliver tangible business value. But Web3 is still nascent and highly nuanced. The technology also presents various risks that are already appearing on regulatory agendas. There is much to discuss today, including, most importantly, the benefits and opportunities of Web3 when combined with the technologies and capabilities of 5G. So let's get things started, and please join me in welcoming our panelists out on stage. All right, welcome. Thank you for joining this evening. All right, I'm going to start off with some introductions of our panelists here. First, we have Jonathan G. Blanco, founder and CEO of Nifmint, an NFT commerce infrastructure. Nifmint allows brands to mint, sell, and custody NFTs directly on their e-commerce platform while handling all crypto and crypto wallets on behalf of the brand and their customer. Jonathan is also the founder of TF Labs, a Web3 management consulting firm and startup studio guiding brands in their adoption of Web3 while spinning out internal Web3 startups. Thanks for joining us, Jonathan.
Thanks for having me.
All right, next we have Jeff Kramer, technical advisor to the CTO of Microsoft. With his deep wealth of knowledge, Jeff has been an integral resource to many. He has spent a decade being an autonomous roboticist, built moonshots at Microsoft, including submersible data centers and holoportation, and helped create the world's first true digital dollar while being co-founder and CTO of Transparent Financial Systems. Jeff has accumulated nearly 20 years of professional experience being an innovator and versatile technologist. He now concentrates his work in Web3, infrastructure, and AI. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right, and next we have our very own Dan Thigeson, T-Mobile's Senior Vice President and General Manager of Wholesale and Platform Operations, including full profit and loss accountability for T-Mobile wholesale line of business. With 25 years working in telecom industry, Dan has focused T-Mobile's wholesale team on growing key customer segments within the U.S. marketplace and developed partnerships with entrepreneurs, founders, investors, as well as some of the world's most recognized brands. Thanks for joining, Dan.
Thank you, Aaron.
All right, and finally, we have Sung Choi, the Senior Vice President of Operations and Business Development for CoinMe, a licensed and regulated crypto exchange that is bringing decentralized finance, or DeFi, to mainstream audiences worldwide. Sung has built a strong foundation of professional experience in managing business operations and corporate strategy with a passion and developments for technology. Thanks for joining, Sung.
Thank you.
All right, I think you guys know the drill. I'm going to start off by asking our panelists some questions, and then I'm going to turn it over here to the folks in the room. So get your questions ready, and also to those joining us online, if you want to go ahead and submit those into the chat. All right, so a little level setting to kick things off. The why for Web3. So I'd like to ask each of you if you can provide some practical examples of where Web3 technology could significantly impact businesses or society.
Me first?
Go for it, Jonathan.
Awesome. Look, why Web3? We often ask why Web3. I like to ask why not Web3. So when it comes to what we're thinking about here is we're just talking about better ways of understanding data, better ways of giving access to the participants in a network. And so obviously my point of view is very much on the commerce vertical and the commerce angle. And so I'll talk about it from that point of view. But we all consume products every single day. We're consuming more and more digital products than we ever have before. And so at this point is, do we want better digital products? Do we want to stick with JPEGs and PNGs, or do we want to have programmable assets? And I'll get more into that later, I'm sure, through the conversation goes. But really what Web3 affords is the ability to program, have things that are immutable, have things that are verifiable, and sure, there might be a little bit of a UX problem along the way that we're currently experiencing, but that is getting better and better as we speak. And just like you don't think about listening to MP3s anymore, you all listen to music, you listen to the latest Beyonce. as Aaron does. The same thing will happen with NFTs and other aspects of Web3 is you won't even know that you're consuming it or using it. It's just going to be a part of your daily task.
Thanks, Jonathan. Jeff?
Yeah, certainly when I think about Web3, it's really a question of digital transformation. So if you think about the process that a lot of companies have gone through over the past 20 years, or longer, they've been able to transform their internal business processes, but extending outside of their business is still a matter of shipping a PDF, sending an email, otherwise trying to communicate. And being able to build systems that allow businesses to be able to work together, form consortiums, be able to solve problems, and or just be able to do business with each other more seamlessly is really important. And information ownership, sharing, understanding of who has access to what, even outside the bounds of the walls of your company, very important.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Dan?
First, let me say thanks to you guys for participating today. It's amazing to actually be sitting up here with you. And thanks again to everybody who is in attendance today. This is a great opportunity to get you guys, for those of you that have heard us speak before, like community building and getting people together to have these conversations is super important for us at T-Mobile and at the community at large. So I really appreciate your attendance and participation today. You will hear me start to talk about Web3 from a philosophical perspective around technology, moving into utility, moving into value. And so when I think about things that Web3 can really, really help with, I try to go back to what are the things that might have an impact on how I live my life. And two of them I could think that come to front of mind pretty quick. One is privacy. Like I feel awkward sometimes when I go somewhere and someone asks me to prove my age and I have to show them a lot of details about myself, right? So what's that? Well, thank you. And every time I go to the bar, they card me. Right? Why is that so funny? Yeah. And so, like, for me, that's not the most important thing. But if, some people are uncomfortable sort of displaying their passport or their identification or something that has a lot of information sort of on display about them personally for something as sort of rudimentary as like, are you old enough to buy alcohol or to have a drink in a bar? Web3 technology is an interesting way to create utility and value that says you don't have to show somebody all of your ID every time you want to transact business with them. It's not really important. When you go to a bar, the only thing that's really important is that you're old enough to drink. You're 21 years old in the state of Washington or in the States, right? So I think there's an interesting sort of Web3 layer there that creates that technology leads to utility, and the value is how you present yourself when certain information is required. Another sort of interesting example of where I think Web3 value is, it's around cryptocurrency. And a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, you're going to start talking about Bitcoin and it's going to go sideways fast. But if you think about the Federal Reserve and how the banking system works and how you manage your own money, you have to pay to keep it somewhere. You have to pay to use it. You always run the risk that the bank that you go to that is holding your money may not actually let you in and give you access to your money. Web3 provides an interesting way to enable you to own your own money, to use it and transact with it in a way that doesn't require you necessarily pay a bank to be the facilitator or the middle person in that transaction. And you can think about using a credit card, sometimes using the ATM, sometimes walking into a bank and talking to a teller. Those are all things that they try to charge you for. They want to take your money as part of giving you your money. And so Web3 is an interesting way. Again, the technology leads to utility, which creates a value. That value is you could save all that. You don't have to spend those fees in that way. And so those are a couple of sort of real life examples that I tend to use as illustrative examples because they're actually pretty easy to understand, where that value is a function of the utility based on this thing called Web3, which is still sort of a technology, right? Yeah.
Going off of what Dan just talked about, and as a financial institution at CoinMe, an analogy that we like to make is when what the internet did for email, is what the blockchain is doing for money, which is cryptocurrencies, but also just blockchain-based assets like stablecoins, where by freeing it from these financial institutions that are existing before the blockchain, you're able to now instantly transact all across the world at any point throughout the day and do it for a fraction of the cost that it used to cost before. So if you think about remittances, which is a massive use case that has been talked about endlessly for people that are talking about cryptocurrencies, there's actually a perfect use case that you're able to enable, allow people to send money to places like Mexico for half, maybe even a quarter of the cost that it costs today. And everything is instant, and it's an amazing experience. So I think, and the fact that if you were to remove the cost of remittances from the GDP of Mexico, you would almost be adding something close to 1% to the GDP. So it's a massive difference for a lot of these economies. So we're going to see really far-ranging effects by making money more efficient.
Thanks, Sung. Thanks for those great examples. I want to follow up, Sung, from a CoinMe perspective. How would you describe the current state of Web3 today? What do you envision, say, in the next 5 years?
From a financial perspective, we've been seeing adoption all the way from retail customers all the way up to institutions. We're talking about BlackRock ETFs and things like that. But what's really exciting is to see growing nascent economies and how they're adopting crypto assets. So in South America, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, where it's starting to really replace a lot of different forms of transacting purely because it's much less expensive and it's much more secure. So you're removing the cost of fraud and chargebacks for a lot of vendors, but you're also making payments instant for them so that they can take it and do what they wish instantly. You don't have to wait for the payment processor to pay you if you take a debit card or a credit card, which might not arrive until the next day, and sometimes that's not fast enough for someone that's running that's a small vendor. So I think those are some of the things that are super exciting from a financial perspective. I'll let everyone else opine on some of the more exciting technical things that are coming up.
Okay, thanks. Jonathan, what about from you from Nifmint? What would you say the current state of Web3 is, and where do you see in 5 years?
Yeah, so the current state of Web3 is pretty non-existent currently, right? Like all of us in this room, or most of us in this room, probably think about it quite often, but you go outside of this and most people don't. That being said, again, it's a use case I'm focused on, is I just really see how we all transact on a daily method as really being a big driver for Web3 overall. When people think about NFTs, they think about these funny monkey pictures and these avatars, and you trade them, and they go up in value. That is the tiniest use case of what NFTs are about, right? Like I'm talking less than 1% of the total opportunity that NFTs as a technology bring is around that aspect of it. It's no different than saying there's a basketball market and then there's a basketball trading card market. So that being said, I believe in a world where we tokenize everything. And that might sound crazy, but if you think about it, everything that's a piece of paper, everything that's a contract, whether that be from real estate to title to physical goods to products, these are all opportunities to be tokenized overall. And what you're talking about then is, hey, instead of this being just a piece of paper or just being a centralized piece of information, now we're essentially putting a digital wrapper around a digital content file, and that digital wrapper, in fact, is part of what's making this programmable, and you just unlock a lot of opportunity there. So I believe that every time in the future you purchase a good or a product or service, there will be an NFT equivalent to it. But I also believe that us as consumers won't even care or understand, or even need to know for that matter. So there's no need for us to interact with, and I'm strictly speaking from a commerce context. I think the financial context is totally different, and my point of view changes on that, by the way. But from a commerce context, from a consumer context, it's really all about we like things because we like the brands. We associate to the brands or people that are affiliated to those brands. And so having that easy access in a clean user experience, we don't care what the technology is. How many people here woke up and use HTTPS today? Did anybody here use HTTPS? You all did, by the way, because you all went on the internet today. So, these are things that through every wave of technology, there has been, these highly technical aspects that seem really crazy to everybody, and now we all just consume it as part of our daily lives. And I think NFTs in particular is going to be that for how we consume digital products.
Great. Thanks, Jonathan. Maybe this question over to Jeff and Dan. Are there specific companies or projects that you would say within the Web3 ecosystem that are really driving the pace, already kind of leading the charge on this?
I think it's, particularly for myself, I'm really excited, and I'll refrain from mentioning any particular companies, but I'm really excited about all of the work being done with zero-knowledge proofs, particularly as it relates to identity, and the ability to transact confidentially. I think a lot of that work is applicable both within direct blockchain use cases as well as external to that. And I think that one of the most interesting things for me is really around central bank digital currencies. Because in a lot of ways, governments are learning how to dance. And it's interesting to see how they're thinking about this work and making decisions between kind of building a panopticon and building kind of an open currency that relates to others, and where they put that balance point.
Interesting.
It's an interesting question. If you look to sort of mainstream industry, Fortune 1000 companies, you can see there are corporations out there that are trying. They're trying to find a way to create the utility and find the value. I'm going to come back to that over and over and over because it's a really easy way to sort of connect what we're trying to message here. But look at some of the big brands in the marketplace today, like Starbucks. Like, they are using Web3 in a sense to really drive a unique experience through their loyalty program. We could argue that it's probably a bit of a pilot, of a test to see if they can actually get past the utility into the value piece. But they certainly create a lot of awareness as part of that. Lots of other brands are trying to do things similarly. The tricky part is, as soon as you start to talk about the technology, it tends to sort of scare people a little bit, and they get confused fairly quickly, because technology is not really the way you want to try to market something. You want to market something for the value of the utility and the value itself, right? And so I think you'll see more and more of that. Like, we're at T-Mobile, for example, like, we're trying to find the way to create value out of Web3 technology, and we're starting in different places with small objects and small pilots and small proof of concept and things like that. But I believe that there's also this sense of awareness that more people have to understand a little bit more about what the technology does and how you can benefit from it. And as that awareness starts to increase, then you're going to see more and more people recognize the value piece of it, and adoption will start to grow. And as adoption becomes more prevalent, more and more companies are going to realize that there is value here. And if you don't do it, but you see your competitor doing it, you're going to start to realize you're losing. And that's generally a pretty big motivator for companies to want to get on board. From a wireless perspective, there are 2 carriers and 1 end carrier that predominantly compete in this marketplace. And I can tell you that from a T-Mobile perspective, we have launched a number of things outside of Web3, nothing to do with Web3. But as soon as we put it in the marketplace, it's very valuable, and it immediately has a competitive reaction. Verizon and AT&T, or anybody else that's trying to provide a similar service, generally tends to try to compete with that. And I think you'll start to see the same thing with Web3 utility and value. As soon as some of the bigger companies find a way to create that value and present it out to their subscriber base, you're going to want to see a lot of other similar competitors or companies go to market with those same kinds of attributes, because it's value, and that's ultimately what they're all trying to do. The tricky part, and this is sort of something I'd love to hear you guys talk about too, is the tricky part is that Web3 is about decentralizing control, right? And enabling you to own your own piece of it. Anything that's relevant to you should be owned by you. So there's a bit of a conundrum there when we're talking about big Fortune 50, Fortune 10, Google, Facebook, some of the big corporate America companies that essentially own all of your data. They own everything about you right now. How do we comfortably move and transition into an operating model where they don't own all that data, but they are the ones that have to sort of lean into enabling some of this technology and some of this utility for us to be responsible for that value ourselves?
That's a great point. Jeff, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, certainly. I think in terms of getting companies to buy into decentralization, I think there's different levels of comfort that they'll get to over time. When companies are working together on a problem, the decentralization argument comes up, but it's not couched as that. It's seen as like data ownership, seen as a way that things that I've done, I own. The things that I share with you, we own. And that, couching in that kind of term changes how people talk about it. Because you bring to somebody, you say, oh, decentralization is very important. They'll be like, well, okay, well, why? And being able to directly draw the line between from, hey, if we share our data like this, to our bottom line is increased because we've cut down on cost, we've been able to drive savings into the market. All of that is really where companies will start picking up on this. Getting to the consumer side, though, much more hard. Yeah, much more difficult.
It's tricky.
Jonathan?
I love this part of the conversation. So I think decentralization is a really interesting topic. I think it's also like the most overused phrase or terminology in Web3 overall, because it's very altruistic, right? I think decentralization makes a lot of sense in money, and I think it makes a lot of sense in Bitcoin in particular. I'm always weary when I hear of a cryptocurrency talk about decentralization not named Bitcoin, because often there is some sort of centralized entity or a group behind it or a foundation that has a large pool of the overall supply, right? So that in its own sense is an issue. I think it really just comes down to like how decentralized is enough for you and in what capacity and what aspect of it, right? So everybody likes to talk about like the maritime industry. Does the maritime industry need to be so decentralized that I can go on the blockchain and see when something was shipped or moved? No, it doesn't. But if there's parties within a consortium of organizations from manufacturing to shipping to supply, and they have some sort of aspect of sharing information, then that can, of course, make sense. I have a hard time believing that any Fortune 500 company would want to give away part of its value creation. So, I'm not to be a downer, but I just don't see why any company that has to optimize shareholder value would ever say like, hey, like let me actually like get rid of some of my value creation. That being said, I do think there's some interesting opportunities for companies who originate from that place and to disrupt incumbent companies, incumbent brands. We're a long ways away from anything like that happening. But yeah, decentralization is always a fun topic.
Say that the maritime example is an interesting one because it's already incredibly decentralized. So like, if you're shipping industry very quickly, you're going on a big ship, the captain has a manifest. That manifest has all the shipping information in it, and that's the way that you like make the shipment happen. And so that's paper in a binder that a single person's holding, brought together by a bunch of people from all over into that binder, and then they go to the other side of the dock and they like open it up and they start handing it out. And in some ways moving towards like a blockchain system run by a consortium is actually a centralizing force, right? You've now created a single set of entities that are able to transact on this. It makes it much, makes it much simpler, makes it much safer, makes it much cheaper. And in doing so, more people will come and join the people who are part of the consortium or join that blockchain. So there's definitely this idea that like you're never destroying trust, right? Trust just gets moved around, even for things like Bitcoin.
Yeah.
You're trusting miners, you're trusting protocol, but you're trusting. And so if you can't destroy trust, you got to move it somewhere. Where do you want it? Where is it least noxious? Where is it the cheapest to have trust? Where does that trust live? And so, yeah, I think you're spot on with that.
Trust the computers, right? I mean, it's kind of weird to say, but I was driving with my dad, and I have Google Maps on, and he's telling me to go a different way than Google Maps tells me. I'm like, I'm not going to go that way. I'm going to go where Google Maps is telling me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sung, you've got something to add?
Yeah, I think one place where we're seeing decentralization and would likely have a better adoption curve is digital assets. Not talking about crypto assets, but just things like NFTs. There's this promise of contributors being able to earn from their art, whether that be images or music, where rather than someone having to centrally do the calculation to then pay out based on what you deserve to be paid for creating that piece of art, you can create trustless systems that are decentralized that will then award the individual, and they'll perpetually be awarded as these digital assets are transacted in the future. So it could be something like art, as I mentioned, or it could be movie theater tickets. It could be concert tickets, whatever it might be, where these things can be traded for the value that it presents for someone else. And I don't think a Fortune 500 company would have an issue in selling these things or marketing these things, as we're seeing with the Nike, the shoe NFTs, and the Hermes bags, and all of that. So I think that one will have a pretty quick curve, and hopefully that will result in, again, the promise of individuals receiving better value for their contribution, rather than it just being up to the controllers of the infrastructure, as we're seeing with the writers' strike and the actors' strike right now in Hollywood.
And the value to the contribution is kind of, Dan, what you were talking about, ownership really is I'd be willing to bet that most of you didn't wake up this morning and say like, oh, my life is so decentralized, so centralized, if only I could decentralize it more. But I'm sure a lot of people would like to have more ownership of the things that they do and consume, right? Whether that be your social, or whether that be, how you interact, with different things that you own, from your physical goods to digital goods. So really that ownership aspect that blockchain and Web3 can unlock, I think, is incredibly powerful.
We've talked about one example, decentralized. What would you guys say is probably the biggest hurdle right now for Web3 adoption?
I would say UI, UX. The technology is intimidating. It's scary to use. Sending crypto on the blockchain, it could just fall into a black hole and you'll never see it again. Whereas that won't happen on Venmo, and that won't happen on your bank account. So I think mature companies need to be able to incorporate digital assets and the blockchain as a technology, so that users feel that it's friendly to use, and really abstracting out that technology piece so that it's just another part of their lives. And for those of us that are old enough to remember when the internet was new, and it was very, very abstract to understand what the web was going to do for us. And to arrive today, as Jonathan's describing, like, you don't think about, using any of this internet technology anymore. I mean, we'll have to get to that with the blockchain, but for that to happen, companies like T-Mobile will have to make it very, very friendly on their existing platforms, so that this isn't something that we worry about anymore.
Any other thoughts? Yes.
Yeah, I would say that it depends on the use case, right? So I agree in the consumer use case, 100%. User experience matters. I think it's interesting to see how people in different countries use Web3 and blockchain stuff. I mean, there was just an article about in South America, how in some countries people are using digital assets, but they're being held by like another person locally who they go to. They've always gone to do like money changing, but they just hold their cash for them in tokens. And then they have somebody they can call. They know where to find them. They can like go over to their house and be like, hey, give me my money. And that gives people a lot of comfort, and the ability for them to feel like, okay, well, there's a face on this. I don't have to think about this digital asset stuff. I just kind of do what I normally do. So I think that part's really, really, really important. And I think the second part is really around enterprise, for enterprise adoption. I think couching it in terms of Web3 or in terms of ownership, it really needs to be couched in terms of improving the bottom line, squeezing out waste, showing how companies can work together more closely, even after they trust each other. Like, what does that look like to build systems that work together outside of the bounds of your own organization?
Great point.
Yeah, definitely agree on the UX issue. UX can be improved. One of the problems on the UX issue, though, is that to improve the UX, you need an intermediary. Is really what it just comes down to. So, to say, because a lot of people be like, oh, MetaMask or whatever wallet you might use, and if you lose your keys and et cetera, what we're really saying out loud is like, oh, like I just wish I had someone I could pick up the phone and be like, I lost this, can you help me, right? So that's going to be the biggest problem for Web3 forever, to be honest, is that. And then you have people who are very much about making sure that people do maintain their ownership of everything, which is fine. I'm all for that, by the way. If anybody here wants to do that, you should do it. I just don't believe that most of you will do it, right? Like, and it's just more from like how consumers use products, overall. So, that's a problem, of course. But again, I very much believe that if I'm banking on the fact that people will rely on intermediaries. You have folks like Coinbase, for example. A lot of people who are very much into cryptocurrency might say negative things about Coinbase, but frankly, they have the best user experience, and they have a dominant market share. And it's really just because they're a custodian at the end of the day. They're essentially a cryptocurrency bank. So I just think that we'll need more aspects like that. Again, though, if you're the type of person that wants to maintain your own keys, maintain your own wallet, handle your own money, and I think everybody should learn to do that, even if you don't do all of that on your own. Anybody who does that is always going to have an advantage over those who decide not to. It's just... Yeah. You want to go through that.
But there's definitely a learning curve there. I mean, you just give somebody 100% accountability to take care of all their own information, and chances are people are going to forget stuff. And then, who do they send the SMS to get, the multi-factor authentication done to get back into their account? Like, that stuff goes away because you're accountable for your own stuff. And so that can be kind of dangerous, right? To your point.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't want that.
Totally. If you don't get to blame someone else for your own mistake, like, who wants to live in that world?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a revealed preference, right? I mean, if you look at even like other fields, right? You look at like investing, right? How popular are ETFs, index funds, comparatively to like I'm in the market every day and like day trading? Like, I got a job, man.
Yeah.
It's not day trading, so I think people are going to follow the same path in Web3.
The other thing I think that would be really helpful for consumers in general is to get some support from mainstream media, which means we need some good examples of things that Web3 technology is enabling for people. That's good. And we need to start talking about it a little less on the technology side, like we can go have conversations around blockchain and smart contracts and non-fungible tokens and things like that, where people's basically their heads just explode because they can't really understand that sort of graduation from these technical terms and concepts into the value it creates. So if we start to talk to consumers about things that are super valuable to them that use that underlying technology, you're going to see a shift in how people think about it. And then to prove that, I think we're going to need to get to a place where some of these big companies, Nike, Starbucks, T-Mobile, others, are doing things to prove the concept, to prove that the way we orchestrate this, which is the technology, actually creates something that people want. And those don't have to be massive, hundreds of millions, 1.2 billion wallet scale to start with. They could be small. They can be opportunities that happen within a community or a company or a city or a group of friends, whatever that sort of cohort is. But we have to go through those exercises and prove that these things are real and that they do create the value. And I think you're going to see for consumers, like as enterprises, big, small, medium-sized, whatever, start to do that, people are going to get much more comfortable with that because they recognize, there's a lot of good that comes out of it.
Could something like that be like offering an NFT to people who attended an event?
What an amazing idea.
Excellent example.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we talked about building trust, use cases that I think really resonate with people. It was interesting when I asked the question about obstacles that regulatory concerns didn't come up. So I do have a question that was submitted that I'll ask you guys. Regulatory and governance frameworks for Web3 are still in their infancy. How should we strike a balance between fostering innovation and implementing regulations to ensure responsible development in the Web3 space? What are your thoughts on that?
Hot.
I want to hear what Sung says.
Yeah.
'Cause the money part, I think, is where we feel it the most right now.
Yeah, there's most at risk with money, right? So as a regulated financial institution in the United States, we feel the weight and the pain of that regulation. A lot of people don't believe that there's heavy regulation in crypto, but there actually is a ton. We're licensed in over 38-ish states, maybe 39. It always fluctuates based on states that start to require or to not require licensing for the exact activity that we provide. But and then we go through things like exams, audits, relicensing applications, and the changing regulations that cause a lot of legal requirements. So all this to say, consumers in the United States are protected. So when you think about the issues that happened with FTX, the issues that we're hearing about with all these other exchanges that are having issues, those are mostly international in nature, because in the United States, if you are operating within the confines of the law, there are very, very strict and heavy regulations. We literally have regulators in our offices right now asking questions for an exam, which happen at least once a year, sometimes more frequently, because there are so many jurisdictions in the United States. So there are regulations. They could be more clear. We would love for them to be a bit more national so that we don't have to deal with so many different regulators all at the same time. But all that to say, there's regulations there. Now, on the consumer side, on the for the NFT type regulations, zero knowledge proof type applications, those are still very unclear. Which again, would love to have more clarity. But ultimately, I want everybody to understand that there are tons of regulations when it comes to financial aspects of digital assets.
Thanks. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think basically it was just, it's more of the lines of, hey, these instruments look similar to past instruments that we've had in the, so just follow those rules. And so part of that has been, you have people who think things like, oh, well, this is brand new, so it needs a complete new guidance. And don't get me wrong, there does need to be some guidance, but for now, we have to follow what rules have been put in place overall.
I think you hear that argument a lot from the people that are sort of under pressure, and maybe it is most of the DeFi sort of segment where they're trying to operate under a set of standards that were designed through the SEC or through the Federal Reserve or the credit system that ultimately says these things, if they look like this, they have to operate within these rules. The tricky part is the world is moving into a place where these things actually are over here and they're different enough. So do they still require the same traditional set of rules in terms of regulatory and compliance? Sung would tell you on the finance side, it seems like there are a lot of compliance and regulatory rules that have to be followed. But I think if you also listen to Coinbase and Binance and some of those guys that are under significant pressure right now, their complaint is, yeah, like some rules exist over there, but there's not enough rules for us to know whether what we're doing is a violation of something or not. Meaning there aren't really enough rules that dictate the way some of these things should be done. And therefore, people are making some assumptions. They're leaning into probably, the easiest way to drive interoperability. And then the risk is they might find out after the fact when a legislative group comes together and makes rules that what they've been doing actually is now against the rules. And that risk and sort of sense of not being certain about whether you're doing is actually compliant or not, because there is no compliance matrix to go bounce it up against, I think is super sketchy in the industry right now. It's why you see the states sort of pausing and wondering what to do. And it's why there's so much tension between Gensler and the SEC and the Federal Reserve and the credit system and the banking system and big Web3 developers and the big, on-ramp, off-ramp companies and the exchanges and like everybody who wants to do something with, again, I'm really thinking about sort of the financial system as the obvious example, but there's hesitancy because people are uncertain as to what rules somebody is going to make tomorrow that might be retroactive to how they've been operating, and all of a sudden, you're the bad guy.
It does really restrict innovation. And as a company, we've seen it, we've experienced it. You know, a lot of contemporaries in the industry that also feel this exact same way, where you're so restricted that what you're seeing is a flight of Web3 companies out of the United States. Right. There's a lot of that. A lot of companies have gone to Dubai or Malta or other jurisdictions that tend to be more friendly and have set more clear guidelines. France falls under this as well, and Hong Kong most recently, where they're attracting all this talent. We're seeing a flight of talent because with remote work, a lot of people don't need to be tied to the United States anymore. So I definitely think that we need better regulations so that things are more clear. That would really open things up for this industry.
And it's really confusing too, so even on the NFT front, because for the most part, NFTs are just things. They're just digital things. But that doesn't mean that you can't treat it like a security, right? You can treat anything like a security, frankly. The Howey test was over oranges or peaches? It was over oranges, right? Treating oranges as a security. So, I mean, I believe that there's certain NFT projects that are out there that probably will get their doors knocked on because they treated their NFTs like securities. When we were talking with brands a couple years ago and NFTs were really hot, we'd have these brands come up to us and like, oh, we really want to get residuals on our NFT sales, or we really want to have it on the secondary market. And my reply to them would always be like, do you do that with any other product you sell? I'm like, no. I'm like, well, why would you want to do that here? And why would you want to do anything that might look like a security? I'm not telling you it is or it isn't. That's not for me to decide. But you basically have to just decide, do you want to do something that just simply causes the door to knock, which means you have to get lawyers involved and spend a lot of money. Doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. I mean, who cares if you're right or wrong? It's, do you want to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to prove that you're right? I don't want to.
All right. So we are making our way through time here, so I want to make sure we get some questions from our audience here in the room and online. So I'm going to ask one more question here, and then I'm going to turn it over to the audience. So get those questions ready. So I'm going to bring this home a little bit, Dan, to the telecom industry, CSPs, and wireless providers like T-Mobile. How do we innovate with Web3 technology, and how do we take advantage of these opportunities?
We're going to need about 4 more days to get through this one. But the easiest example is we look for partners, like this is real life for us right now. We look for partners that are executing a value proposition with Web3 technology today, and we find a way to intermediate that and connect them to us. So we don't actually operate in Web3 yet, but we can help somebody bring that value to life that is a Web3 operator. And we've got like real life use cases where we're doing that. In the wholesale group, for example, with the business that I'm most familiar with. How do you take that and scale that to something that's larger? I think that's sort of the next challenge for us is how do we convince the other channels that operate across T-Mobile that the things we're doing in smaller scale are actually legitimate and eligible to be brought to a bigger stage and scale it from that perspective. But there's so many use cases that as a wireless operator we could take advantage of. If you think about loyalty programs, that's the most obvious example probably for NFT use. It's not necessarily the most valuable, but it's certainly the one that most people are starting to hear about in the marketplace. How do you create this amazing loyalty program and use NFTs to reward people and drive certain behavior and create programs around that make them love you as a brand even more? Privacy and security, digital identity. How do you ensure that when someone has a phone number that like you're not enabling someone else to know anything else about them as they transact business with their phone or their phone number? Another big one is even on the inside of T-Mobile, like we do a lot of business across wireless carriers all over the world. It's called roaming. There's lots of interesting ways to use Web3 technology to arbitrate and reconcile roaming records like immediately. with a massive, probably a massive operational sort of overhead savings. So there's all kinds of different examples. But like I kind of said earlier, we're going to have to start fairly small and work our way up. It's kind of those things, I jokingly have this conversation with my team often. People, you know that sort of cliche saying where they give you a little bit of rope and you got to be careful not to hang yourself? That's sort of how I see a lot of this playing out. We'll give somebody a little bit of rope and they're going to either tie a really nice bow or they're going to hang themselves, right? But if they do tie the really nice bow, then usually the next step is somebody gives you a little bit more rope. And so now you get to make something a little bit bigger. And it's iterative in that sense, where you start small, you show the value and that you can do something productive. They give you a little bit more resource to see if you can replicate that on a larger scale, and again on a larger scale. And I see that as sort of our progression into this technology and utility and value. It's going to start small in little pockets, but eventually you're going to see us start to adopt it more and more and more. And pretty soon it will be sort of mainstream, or even better, it will be predominantly how we operate behind the scenes, but the consumer will have no idea because they don't care about the technology and necessarily the utility. They just recognize the value.
Love it. Jeff, you're nodding. Something to add?
Yeah, I think that the idea of, particularly for roaming is a good example, the idea of being able to have corporations that otherwise would be doing some sort of reconciliation process that involves data, involves kind of private data, and that they don't want to share with others, but they want to make sure that everyone gets paid, is actually incredibly powerful. And certainly Microsoft's announced something much like that in regards to Xbox royalties. We have been running an internal blockchain system for a really long time now, probably 6 years now, to be able to do royalty settlement, and particularly for DLCs on the Xbox. So buy a DLC, certain companies get a percentage of that DLC revenue. How do we be able to pay people quickly? How do we make sure that the numbers are correct? How are those companies assured that they're getting paid what they're owed? And all of that used to be manual and used to take 30 days, and now it gets done in overnight. Yeah.
All right. Do we have any questions here in the room? Yes, please. Oh, turn the mic on up here.
It's on.
Here we go.
Hi.
There you go.
So fascinating conversation. I'm kind of both shocked and surprised that we have 5 technology geeks on stage, and you were able to go 40 minutes without saying generative AI, unless I missed it, but I believe. So I'll bring it up. Do you guys see any synergies or opportunity to leverage generative AI for Web3 adoption, maybe around the UX, UI, something else? But do you see any opportunity to really expand the adoption and maybe even accelerate it leveraging Gen AI?
Jeff, I know you want this one.
I was going to say, as the person who's
we were
been
talking about this earlier.
living generative AI more than anyone really should. It's interesting that you pointed the direction of your question. You've kind of phrased it as can Gen AI assist Web3? I think the opposite is likely more true, which is to say, can you use Web3 to be able to have attribution of aspects that go into generative AI models, and then be able to use that attribution to be able to then pay people automatically, or everyone. It actually solves a critical problem with standard money systems. If you were to try to do it with, cash, because really, if somebody's using 1/1 of your data in order to make a query happen, you're not going to cut someone a check. So you need to have a way of tracking all of that information. And if your stuff shows up very often, then maybe you get an actual royalty check at some point. That is, I think, probably the most direct application that I can think of. But I bet there are others. But I think the directionality is certainly more not how Gen AI can help Web3, but more how Web3 can help Gen AI.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit more to that, as I totally agree, is especially when you think about just from a content perspective, right, is there's going to need to be some level of provenance and authenticity authentication to where this content is being created from overall. I mean, you can generative AI my face on top of the rock, right? And then I can start talking like the rock if I wanted to. You've probably seen some of those songs or listened to those songs of like Drake and Jay-Z and whoever, and they're amazing songs. Like they are amazing songs that is being created here. And so, you know, what is real and what is created by AI, that line is getting more and more blurred every single day, which is why you will need to have these content files tokenized. And because if you have it tokenized, you can prove, you know, what was actually created by a human versus what was created by AI.
Thank you. Next question.
So you guys already brought up this idea of private data versus public data. And I think about the companies that I've worked for, and part of what makes a company valuable is their processes, their customer list, their vendors, their tech, whatever. So in thinking about that, and thinking about since the blockchain is a public ledger, what things have you guys seen that has been private could potentially become public?
I would actually split that a little bit, if you don't mind. So I would say that some blockchains are public, and that there's a gradation of publicity. So if you were to think about consortium chains or things like that, I mean, and people may yell at me and tell me, that's not really Web3. Okay, I'm not going to get a doctrinal argument with anyone. But those applications, I think, are the places you're going to see far more kind of data on chain for businesses, particularly relates to the work that they're doing, right? So if like I'm building a shipping consortium with a bunch of other companies, well, I need to be able to share, like, what am I shipping, or, and where's it going, and also their data amongst this group in order to facilitate a market. And, you can imagine making that public, but that's a lot of information that you don't necessarily want to have available. Now, with zero knowledge, maybe you can get away with it, right? And that people can only unlock the things that they need to see, and we can just post it all on chain. But I feel like a lot of corporations will be hesitant to post a lot of public data.
Some of the most valuable Web3 start, like Dune, the goal of the tool is to help you understand on-chain data from more of a financial perspective. And so you can track trades by some of the largest and most successful wallets. And that would be private data that a JP Morgan might have about some trader, but now it's fully public. You can see what trades they're making on DeFi protocols. So you could go copy some of the best trading strategies out there on DeFi. And so that's been a really interesting publicly made available data that definitely wasn't available before.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
Hey,
Good
Doc.
seeing you again, Dan.
Thank you, you too.
Jonathan, Adam told me to tell you hello. Lens protocol sucks. I like those, man. As we know, that the best way to get familiar with blockchain and Web3 is to actually use it. So my question to you is, how are your enterprises, your companies, going to actually use blockchain and Web3 to solve internal problems within your company? Blockchain has been one of the few technologies that we've seen that, from a consumer basis, more consumers are familiar with it than the enterprises. And so I would have challenged the corporations to utilize the technology to solve their own problems. So how are you using that for like configuration management or in other ways?
Question.
Yeah, that's a really good one. I can give you a couple examples. So if you think about this environment today in this room, it's part of a program that really is meant to drive innovation. We have an accelerator program, we have an incubator program, we have a T-Challenge program, we have hackathons, we have this thing called the DevEdge community that we're building. All of those things are designed to find ways to bring that utility to life And so for us, again, I think it goes back to how do you incorporate the technology? You find people that know how to execute on it, and you bring them into the fold and let them do it. Let them try it. Proof of concept is a big, big thing for us because it's going to enable us to find people that are good at operating with Web3 technology and show us that thing that they can do with it. And again, we probably don't have the bandwidth to go out and just build an entire stack of Web3 technology into our wireless network or into our core network, into our IT systems, but we can find people that are good at doing those things, create that interface, that transition into those, and learn from how they operate to make the decision on how we then sort of make that leap of faith and do it ourselves. And that's what's actually happening. All of these programs that in particular Aaron is responsible for and helps to funnel into the business are designed to find those kinds of opportunities. Primarily, we focus today on things that are 5G centric, where we can leverage our biggest asset, which is the network. But there's a lot of stuff that's coming through there as well, Doc, that's Web3 centric or AI centric. And it's up to us to figure out how to pick and choose which ones of those things we think will be the easiest transition into utility and value so that we can sort of do exactly what you've described. Find a way to incorporate that technology into how we actually operate as opposed to just integrating into somebody else that uses that technology. And those are successful programs for us, but it's also not our core business, so you can only give so much attention to them at any point in time as we try to enable it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
Hi. So I have a question for you. You made a statement that got me get up. You said trust, right? You compare trust to energy in a way. So trust can never be destroyed, waste, which is the definition of energy. Energies can be transferred from one place to another. So I want you to kind of elaborate on the fact that you're using zero-knowledge proof, right, for a trust. And how do you use zero-knowledge proof in the same context as how you define trust? Mm-hmm. But trust is related to the energy. The definition that you use in trust is the same definition that scientists, everybody, if you're a scientist, you know that's what energy is. Mm. So how does zero knowledge fall into that definition? Because it really got me thinking about what zero knowledge is, if zero knowledge can really work in the definition of energy when you compare it to trust. Thank you.
Man, I'm glad that is directed to you.
I'm trying to, if I understand what you're asking correctly, so, and I don't want to torture the metaphor too much. I think there is, I think this idea of trust is really hard. And I think that zero knowledge proofs are helpful in that you have the ability, if you trust the development team and you trust the mathematics. But that's where your trust is lying. Your trust isn't lying. And frankly, you're trusting all of the other infrastructure around it. Like having zero knowledge proofs are great, except if somebody hacks in the server that you are submitting your ID to on the way to getting the zero knowledge proof to happen, then, guess what? Now you've leaked your information, right? And so I think that they offer an opportunity to create systems that you couldn't otherwise build, but it doesn't actually improve trust beyond you still have to trust that the developer did it correctly and the math's right.
Good answer. Next question.
I wanted to, I work for T-Mobile. I wanted to preface this conversation, the question by saying that I'm a software developer by profession, and I haven't delved into Web3 per se, but even for at a conceptual knowledge, some of the things that you guys talked about are way beyond the horizon that I deal with. And talking about use cases of NFTs and all that, that's been there, done that, etc. Right? So I feel like there is a long progression, like several of you are already talking before some of these things become fruition. But the question, so that's the context I want to set. So now the question that I have is, I do I can't see a world in which there is zero technological constraint, so to speak. Like, for example, today we have a DNS regulatory authority, right? It's not necessarily a government doing it, but there is some technological authority or ICNA or I forget the name of the consortium. Somebody is regulating it, right? So me as a ultimate end user who's going to trust some token or building a token would need to rely, just like how you said, on the developer who's hosting the infrastructure or the company that's hosting infrastructure, et cetera, right? So there's got to be some, it's got to be zero like technological consortium or technological basis to this. Is there some path to roadmap to that being established, or am I even wrong in saying that there should be some entity?
So, well, so if I understand, it's like, you know, like essentially like what's the source of truth at the end of the day, like, or like where is that, you know, how does it develop? And so
the analogy that I'm using is pretty simple.
Sure.
DNS authority, right?
Yeah. So when it comes to like Bitcoin, for example, Bitcoin has nodes, and these nodes validate the network essentially, right? And so typically if it's the more nodes that there are, the more check-in points that there are, and essentially the more validating that's taking place. There are private blockchains that have one or 5 nodes essentially, and so you're trusting 5 nodes as opposed to thousands of nodes, overall. So that's. And from a technical perspective, and you could probably get even further if you want.
Yeah, it's an interesting question.
Just to be clear, that isn't quite going to get us to where this is going to go to, right? Where everybody has some identity that they can show to somebody. Let's say you tell me that, oh, I have a Bitcoin-based identity, and you show me this. I'm not going to trust you unless I trust Bitcoin.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Well, that's exactly it. You have to trust the network, right? And you're trusting the network because of the amount of nodes that are doing the validation.
The systems are far more like Linux than they are Bluetooth.
Yeah.
And so that's probably the best way to think about it.
Yeah.
You have a group of companies, a group of people, a group of whatever that have come together and said, like, we have a protocol way of thinking.
Yeah.
And that kind of open source, kind of rough and ready mechanism is what drives it. It isn't like Bluetooth. Like, people didn't come together and be like, Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Because
I'm not going to, as a company, as T-Mobile, may not trust Bitcoin, right? But I may trust Linux just as technology. Right?
Yeah, that's right. And so but you get familiarity with Linux though via companies that use it, via your internal people who are driving it, and so that's the same sort of thing I think that's going to happen with things like Bitcoin and other Web3 technologies. You have internal advocates.
Yeah. Totally get it. But now you're automatically saying how some of the trivia that was talked about is not quite that, right? It's not fully autonomous to the extent that I am driving everything and I'm driving identity that you trust.
No, that's right. Yeah, I mean, you all agree that we all agree by the same set of rules, right?
Yes.
So like Bitcoin, like people say like, oh, Bitcoin is totally open. And that's not really true. You still have to submit like a real transaction.
Yeah.
Like I can't just write a transaction to Bitcoin and be like, hey, pay me infinity dollars, right? Like it doesn't work. And so, you are agreeing as part of your participation to follow the rules.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Another layer to this that might be interesting. So most major blockchains have improvement proposals that you can submit. So like Ethereum, EIP, most of them have these where you're discussing in a decentral fashion how to improve the protocol and the network, and people vote based on, some are based on token holding, some are based on other methods, but ultimately you're able to improve the protocol together, and people then work on those improvements. So
sure, but that's just the regular process that happens. But it still goes back to my fundamental question, which is that let's fast forward to 2 years, 5 years from now. You at least have to have a set of these entities that people start to rely on, right? Let's say I come up with my own Murthy 2 entity, and you can't just say my ID is coming from Murthy 2 and have Erin trust it, right? mean, it seems like there should still be some sort of a DNS sort of authority, something.
Yeah. The field's open.
Yeah. Thank
For
you.
real. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, do you have another question? Please.
It's actually probably a good segue. So my question is, I'm a recruiter by trade, and so I feel like I create a lot of content in Web3. It seems like the killer app of Web3 is like just speaking in plain language and explaining it to people to make it make sense. And so I mentioned this, like, when I first got into Web3, my idea was I wanted to get my mom and dad to understand, to transact, to do this. But I feel like that's the lowest common denominator because I have two sisters that are under age 40 that grew up with a cell phone in their hand. So it would make a lot more sense to have them make it make sense to them, right? Speaking in plain language. I'm a technical, non-technical recruiter, and I'm just dangerous enough to understand what the two gentlemen behind me just said. But also, that's not going to make sense to most everybody else. So in terms of just actionable advice for everybody going forward, given that's the case, what conversations might you be having with people that aren't in this space? How are you explaining it to people that don't inhabit this space? What words are you using? Are you changing wallet to account? Are you changing NFT to digital collectible? Just curious about that for folks as we continue to evangelize this space in the right way.
Great question.
Yeah, that's actually an amazing question because the vernacular is a huge piece of it, right? That's why, like, a couple times I've referenced, like, you can't keep talking about it as blockchain and smart contracts and NFTs because there's no translatable bridge to, like, what does that actually mean? So I know I can't give you the advice as to how you want to talk about it, but I do think the best opportunity you have to get somebody to understand the value is to talk about it in real life terms, like not about the technology, but about the thing that you're trying to do for them or the thing that the technology will do for them. There's not a lot of examples out there, actually. There's a few, cryptocurrencies and trading and things like that, but there's enough bad news out there to offset the good news as well, so I'm not sure that's the right use case either. But I tend to think when I try to have these conversations across T-Mobile, so for example, we're trying to build a community within T-Mobile to think about Web3 as an operatable technology, right? And I see people just go blank when I start to talk about, oh, well, we've got this program, we can call Jonathan in here and he's going to use his TF Labs NFT gateway to create these NFTs, and then and people are just, they don't know how to think about it, right? But if I start to talk about it from a real life scenario, like, well, actually, we want to create a loyalty program that we can white label and sell off to other companies to operate on their behalf. And the way we do that is we create an operating model where every transaction is available to see on sort of like an open ledger. And so every transaction can be followed from start to finish, and that creates a certain kind of value, and that value manifests itself into, if you have this thing that's made it all the way through this transaction, then you're special. And you start to talk about it sort of in those kinds of terms, which has nothing to do with the technology. It's more about what is the utility. Then I think you can start to get people to understand it a little bit better. Also, like, the more mainstream media covers Web3, good, bad, or indifferent, the more people are going to start to understand at least the framework and the construct about, okay, there's something out there. I'm going to need to some extent understand, vaguely what it means. But I do try to break it down to like the simplest use case possible because it's kind of the thing that connects people when to have a conversation. You have to kind of speak someone else's language. And if you go in as a technologist and try to speak to a marketing person about technology, it's just, there's a big translation gap there.
100%. It's all about how do you speak to the marketer, right? Like, there's a reason why marketers market. There's a reason why once something's built and developed, it gets into the hands of the consumer or whoever the user is. You don't have very many developers doing the sales, right? But it's all about not, for anybody who's ever sold anything, you don't sell the what, you sell the why. Like, you always sell the why. And so, unfortunately, in Web3, too many people are selling the what, and just people don't understand what the what. So
what the what?
What the what, exactly. So, with that, I think I kind of have a weird point. I don't know, weird, but I've never liked the notion of like teaching people about Web3 and then all of a sudden they're just going to want to use it, right? Like going to school and learning about Web3 and now because of that you want to use crypto or you just have to have better experiences, right? So like if I can, purchase Bitcoin by going to an ATM machine at the grocery store and I just stick $1 in there and now I have Bitcoin, that's a pretty darn good experience. Commercial for a coin awesome. Right there, right? For anybody here that wants to remember the fact that they came to this event today and they want to have like a commemoration of that, like just like a digital ticket stub, guess what? You can scan a QR code at the front here and you can get a digital collectible of today's event that T-Mobile put together, right? And so, which you really can do that, by the way. So it's all about like, what does the consumer want? What is the experience first and foremost? Because, I mean, imagine teaching your, like going back to your analogy, like remember when like email came out and like teaching your parents about email or teaching them about like building a website, right? And now they just use that every single day. Our parents use that every single day. So I think it's really no difference. It's more about just making it accessible first and foremost, which I think brands like T-Mobile and the companies that we all love and interact with daily is how we're all going to consume it.
Yeah, along those lines, giving it
you have to give a commercial for me now.
There you go.
I'm just
totally fair.
I think having the ability to actually experience it and hold it in their hands, like having NFTs at a conference that you can then get. I think it's really valuable. My father actually owns more crypto than I do, and part of that was because he went ahead and I helped him buy crypto and experience it and kind of follow along, and he went ahead and invested a lot more and much better than I did. So kudos to him. But I think ultimately it's that personal experience. A product I'm really interested in is in the near future, Sports Illustrated is going to have an NFT-based ticketing system that they're pushing out. And so for all the sports fans and people going to events, when you get that token-gated object where the gate isn't just to the event, right? But it's also to a group chat of everyone that holds that token, presumably that all went to that event together. It's replays of the event that are only available to the people that hold that token. I think being able to get those exclusive experiences is really going to move the needle for a lot of fans of all kinds of events, and that will help people understand the power of having this asset in their wallets.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with what everyone said. The only thing I would say is like product design or product building doesn't really change, even though you have Web3. Like anything that applies to building a normal product, like does my customer want this? Like you can't eat decentralization.
Yeah.
So
I remember a few years ago in the ICO days, you'd have people be like, well, I'm going to create real estate blockchain, or I'm going to create like Uber with Web3 or blockchain. And it's like they would forget they'd have to create the Uber part.
Yes, you got to get the first half,
Uber
right.
part first,
Yeah,
right? Or like the actual product part first.
100%.
All right. Looks like we have time for one more question. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. So also just, okay, sorry, this is freaking me out, the microphone. So I'm a marketer. I work at T-Mobile, and I'd love to volunteer to partner with your team on kind of bringing some of these use cases to life, because this idea of how do we articulate the value prop and actually like create consumer value versus the technology value and like what infrastructure, I think the bridge of those two is really interesting. That being said, my question, and I know just enough to be dangerous, working on a sustainability project at one point, just knowing that cryptocurrency and there's a really large environmental footprint and a big carbon footprint associated with a lot of these new technologies. And since we're building them now from scratch, how are companies thinking about that footprint, since we're starting from ground zero, right? And so we don't necessarily have to make the same mistakes of the oil companies of the past that may or may not have known. How are companies thinking about that now and founders thinking about that?
Great question. Thank you.
So a couple things on this. So obviously, no brand is going to want to say like, hey, I want to have a heavier carbon footprint than I do before, right? A lot of the blockchains actually don't consume as much energy as what is assumed. Whoever did the PR campaign against that did a really good job. But so that usually has to do with like proof of work. So proof of work takes compute power, which means it takes energy, which is part of that. So Bitcoin right now is I think there's a couple like tiny coins, but Ethereum is no longer proof of work. Bitcoin is proof of work, so it does cost money. One thing to clarify with Bitcoin, a lot of Bitcoin is actually mined off of energy that wasn't going to be used already. But I don't want to get into that side of the conversation. But what I will say is when it comes to proof of stake blockchains is that, yeah, they don't consume nearly as much energy. But I do want people to wonder also, and I'll let Jeff take it from here, how much energy do you think AI actually takes? Because we don't even have enough data centers to do the AI that we want right now. So not to deflect a little bit, but that's an even bigger problem.
I cannot comment about that.
Call you, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. No, I will say that sustainability is really important, and I think that John, like the idea of proof of stake taking over from proof of work is really helpful. Like, I would not build any new products on a proof of work chain. It's just not good to kind of do that if you don't need the benefits that proof of work provides.
I think one thing I'd like to point out is the infrastructure that digital currencies replace, the banking system as a whole. I mean, I don't want to say replace, but the technologies that are being replaced, excuse me. Think about the branch ATM model, the personnel that's required to maintain the bank ledgers, the servers. Crypto assets are actually very, very efficient from that perspective. So it's been an evolution, as it's been described, but we're seeing, to go from proof of work to proof of stake, and even with the proof of work, the tools that do the work are being improved as well to be more energy efficient. All this to say, everything is improving. Everyone wants efficiency at the end of the day, because if you're more efficient, you make more money, right? So the industry is striving for that. Yeah.
Great. All right. I think with that, we're going to call it a wrap. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Audience as well. Thank you, everyone. Conversations can continue. The bar will remain open. We've got some food back there. And of course, be sure to check out the demos if you haven't had an opportunity. And our next session is August 15th. The topic is education. So please join us. Sign up on our website, techexperience.com. And thank you again, and have a good evening.
Cool. Thank you. Oh. Nice job.
Thank you. Always appreciate it.